There is a moment in the lives of certain people when everything stops. Not externally, the world keeps turning, responsibilities continue to demand attention, relationships remain functional, but something internal simply ceases, as if an invisible string that held up the entire emotional structure had silently snapped. It's a collapse that makes no noise. It doesn't draw attention. It doesn't generate pity or help. It's an intimate implosion that happens while smiling in photos, while meeting deadlines, while answering "I'm fine" when someone asks how you are. But inside, something fundamental has died. Jung called this the dark night of the modern soul, the moment when the social mask becomes physically unbearable to wear, when pretending that life makes sense requires more energy than you have available, when the persona built to please, survive and fit in finally reveals its true nature, a polished prison that slowly kills those who inhabit it. It is at this point that a strange and disturbing feeling arises, the realization that the entire structure of life, work, relationships, goals, dreams sold as achievements, was built for someone we are not, as if we were living the life of a stranger, playing a role we never chose, following a script written by others. And the scariest thing, discovering that this feeling of alienation is not a personal defect. It is a symptom of something much bigger, a silent epidemic that affects millions of functionally dead people, operating on autopilot while their souls cry out for liberation. People who wake up every day feeling like tired actors playing their own lives. But there is something deeper going on in this collapse. Something that conventional psychology cannot explain, but that Jung understood perfectly. This is not an end. It is a call. When the soul reaches its limit of tolerance for falsification, it begins a brutal but necessary process of self-rescue. And then something curious happens. At the exact moment when this pain reaches its limit, when there is no more strength to continue pretending, certain messages begin to appear. As if the unconscious, desperate for communication, intensifies its symbolic activity. A video appears in the feed, a conversation hits the right note, a sentence in a book describes exactly what we cannot verbalize. It is no coincidence. It is the soul actively seeking the keys to escape its own prison. And if this content has reached you now, it is because something inside you has recognized. This message is necessary, urgent, unpostponable. Because there is a truth about this internal collapse that almost no one has the courage to say. And that truth completely changes the meaning of the pain you feel, of the emptiness that corrodes you from within, of the feeling of living a life that belongs to no one. Modern society has mastered the art of creating invisible prisons. They are not made of bars or walls, but of expectations, routines, and empty promises that repeat themselves in an endless loop. Study, graduate, work, marry, consume, produce, obey. And if you follow all the steps correctly, you will be rewarded with something called happiness. But no one explains that this happiness is a mirage built in a laboratory, a pasteurized and packaged version of contentment that tastes like plastic and has the texture of paper. It is the happiness of the shopping mall, of status on social media, of family approval. It is anything but real life. Millions of people wake up every day in apartments that look like showrooms, drive financed cars to jobs that drain their vital energy, return home too exhausted to feel anything but a creeping emptiness. And when that emptiness becomes too loud to ignore, society offers anesthetics, entertainment, consumption, superficial relationships, obsessive productivity. It's like living inside a transparent aquarium. From the outside, everything looks perfect. The decor is in place, the lighting is adequate, there is constant movement. But inside, there is only the mechanical repetition of the same movements, day after day, in a rarefied atmosphere that does not sustain real life. Only functional survival. Normality has become a socially accepted drug, a form of addiction that is not classified as a disease because it is shared by almost everyone. It is the addiction to conformity, to false security, to life on autopilot. And like all addictions, it requires ever-increasing doses to maintain its effect. More work, more shopping, more distractions, more rushing, so there is no time left to question. The system is ingenious in its cruelty. It doesn't break people all at once. That would be too obvious. Instead, it sucks the vitality out drop by drop, replacing dreams with responsibilities, curiosity with efficiency, spontaneity with productivity. It's such a gradual process that many don't even notice when they stop being human beings and became human resources. The mechanism is perfect. It starts in childhood, when we teach children that the important thing is to be well behaved, get good grades, and not make too much noise. It continues into adolescence when we tell them that dreams are silly and that they need to think about the future. And it consolidates in adulthood when we sell our souls in easy installments, one sensible choice at a time. Jung warned about this almost a century ago. The greatest threat to modern mental health would not be individual madness, but collective madness disguised as sanity. The transformation of unique and complex human beings into functional statistics, into interchangeable parts of a machine that values only productivity and obedience. And this machine is seductive. It offers security in exchange for authenticity. It promises stability in exchange for spontaneity. It guarantees social acceptance in exchange for your inner voice. It's a seemingly fair deal. Give up who you are and you'll get a place in the world, a salary, a socially approved identity in return. But the real price is only revealed later, when the idealistic young person becomes the cynical executive, when the artist becomes the administrative employee, when the dreamer becomes the pragmatist who advises other young people to be realistic. It is a slow death of the soul masked as maturity. The cruelest thing is that this system feeds itself through our unconscious complicity. Every time someone stifles a creative impulse to be responsible, every time a person chooses security over adventure, every time we accept a job that kills our soul because it pays the bills, we are strengthening this structure. The tragedy is that this prison was built with our own consent. No one forced us, we were convinced, seduced by the promise that if we were good boys and girls, if we followed the rules, if we didn't question too much, we would be rewarded with a fulfilling life. But the reward never comes, or when it does, it tastes like ashes. And the most perverse thing is that this golden prison is sold as freedom. You can be anything you want, they say, as long as it is socially acceptable, economically viable, and does not disturb the established order. It is a freedom of choice. You can choose from pre-approved options, but never question whether you want to be in the restaurant. Modern life has created a perverse paradox. The more successful a person becomes within this structure, the more dead they become inside. The more they adapt perfectly to social expectations, the less they can access their own vitality. It is as if social success were directly proportional to existential failure. There are millions of people walking around like functional zombies, fulfilling their obligations efficiently, maintaining cordial relationships, paying their bills on time, but completely disconnected from anything that resonates as true life. They are like potted plants, technically alive but never truly blooming. When someone begins to feel that there is something fundamentally wrong with this structure, the system quickly offers explanations. It's just stress. It's a lack of gratitude. It's depression that can be solved with medication. It's a midlife crisis that will pass. Anything to avoid the most dangerous question of all. What if the problem is not with the person, but with the life they are being forced to live? This question is revolutionary because it suggests that perhaps total adaptation to society is in fact a form of illness, that perhaps discomfort, anguish, and the feeling of not belonging are signs of a healthy soul reacting to a toxic environment, that perhaps existential pain is the psyche's last form of resistance against its own annihilation. But accepting this requires confronting an even more uncomfortable truth, that the normal life we have built with so much effort and sacrifice may be precisely what is killing us inside. And that perhaps it is time to question not only our choices, but the entire value system that underpins them. It is at this point that something inevitable begins to happen. The soul, tired of being suffocated, begins a silent rebellion. And this rebellion does not happen through screams or protests, but through a much more subtle and powerful language. There are moments in life when chance ceases to exist, when a song comes on the radio with exactly the lyrics that need to be heard, when a book falls open on a page that seems to have been written specifically for that moment, when a casual conversation touches on a wound that no one knew was open. Jung gave a name to this: synchronicity. It is not magic. It is not fate. It is the language that the unconscious uses when the ego refuses to listen through conventional channels. It is the psyche's navigation system trying to guide a lost soul back home. The unconscious does not speak through rational arguments or logical explanations. It whispers through symbols, seemingly impossible coincidences, encounters that should be casual but carry meanings too profound to be ignored. It is as if there were a hidden intelligence orchestrating external events to reflect the internal transformation that is trying to emerge. When someone is on the threshold of an existential rupture, at that point where the old life no longer serves but the new one has not yet been born, the unconscious intensifies its symbolic activity. Suddenly, everything seems to carry meaning. A phrase heard by chance on the street echoes for days. A movie touches on exactly the issue that has been tormenting you for months. A person appears out of nowhere bringing exactly the perspective that was missing. And then the question arises: is this real or just a projection? Is it coincidence or is something bigger happening? The rational mind tries to categorize, explain, reduce everything to statistical probabilities. But the soul immediately recognizes the authenticity of what is happening. It is as if it were hungry for direction and suddenly began to find clues everywhere. What materialistic science cannot explain is how this symbolic communication works with surgical precision. How is it possible that the right video appears in the feed at the exact moment when the person most needs that message? How can a seemingly random conversation carry exactly the words that someone needed to hear but never had the courage to seek out? The answer lies in a deeper understanding of how the human psyche works. The unconscious is not a separate entity operating independently of consciousness. It is a complementary intelligence that processes information at a different frequency. While the conscious mind deals with immediate and logical data, the unconscious works with patterns, trends, possibilities, and connections that transcend linear causality. Jung understood that the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed memories or primitive impulses. It is a living, dynamic intelligence that constantly seeks balance and evolution of the psyche. And when the conscious ego is lost, confused, stuck in self-destructive patterns, the unconscious uses all external reality as a mirror to communicate what needs to be understood. That is why certain people, books, movies, and ideas appear in our lives just when we are ready to receive them. Not before, because the ego has not yet developed the sensitivity necessary to understand the message. Not after, because the moment of transformation would have already passed. But at the perfect time when the pain has reached the level necessary to break down resistance and open the mind to new possibilities. There is a fundamental difference between actively seeking answers and being receptive to receiving them. When someone desperately seeks solutions, they usually find only confirmation of what they already believe. But when the search comes from a deeper place, from an authentic need for transformation, answers begin to emerge from unexpected places. This explains why millions of people can watch the same content, but only a few feel that strange familiarity, that sense of deep recognition. It's not that the message is different for each person. It's that only a few have developed the receptivity necessary to decode what is being communicated between the lines. If this video has reached you, it is no accident. Pause for a moment and feel the strange familiarity of these words, as if they were thoughts that were already inside you, just waiting for a language that would make them clear. This is not coincidence. It is synchronicity in action. The collective unconscious, that deepest layer of the psyche we all share, functions as an invisible network connecting similar human experiences. When someone is going through a process of awakening, they automatically tune into content, people, and situations that resonate with that frequency of transformation. But this symbolic communication has a peculiar characteristic. It never convinces by force. It never shouts. It never forces. It just touches, suggests, insinuates. It's like distant music that can only be heard when we stop the noise of the mind and pay attention. And when we finally listen, the feeling is always the same. I always knew this. I just didn't have the words to express it. Synchronicity intensifies precisely in moments of greatest crisis because crisis breaks down the defenses of the ego. When someone is comfortable, established, secure in their certainties, the unconscious whispers softly and is rarely heard. But when life falls apart, when certainties dissolve, when pain becomes unbearable, barriers break down, and symbolic communication flows with almost frightening intensity. It is in this state of creative vulnerability that the right messages begin to appear. Not generic or motivational messages, but specific personalized communications that speak directly to each person's particular wound. As if the entire universe conspired to deliver exactly what each soul needs to take the next step. There is an ancient navigation technique called celestial navigation, where sailors use the stars to find direction in oceans with no visible landmarks. The unconscious works in a similar way. When we are lost in the vastness of human experience, it offers us symbolic reference points to guide us toward our psychic destiny. But there is a paradox in this communication. The more one tries to force or control the process, the less effective it becomes. Synchronicity works through receptivity, not manipulation. One must be open without being desperate, attentive without being anxious, receptive without being dependent. And it is precisely this receptivity that sets the stage for the next inevitable move in this process. The moment when one must leave the comfort zone of understanding and enter the risky territory of action. There is an invisible chasm that separates two versions of the same person. The one who knows what needs to be done and the one who actually acts. Between these 2 points, there is an empty space where all the fears, all the excuses, all the rationalizations that keep someone stuck in a life they hate in the name of security that does not nourish them live. Jung called this moment of confrontation with the inner dragon. Not an external dragon that can be fought with swords or strategies, but the symbolic creature that lives within the psyche and whose function is to keep everything exactly as it is. This dragon whispers sophisticated lies. You're not ready. This isn't the right time. What if it goes wrong? What will others think? The dragon never lies completely. There is always a grain of truth in its words, enough to seem sensible, prudent, realistic. It does not say you will fail. It says you may fail and failure would be terrible. It does not say don't change. It says change, but only when you are absolutely sure it will work. And that absolute certainty never comes, because certainty is the luxury of those who choose mediocrity. Those who decide to live authentically must learn to dance with uncertainty, to build bridges while crossing them, to jump before knowing exactly where they will land. The leap toward authenticity is terrifying because it involves a form of death. The symbolic death of the persona that was built to survive. The death of the social character that brought you here but has now become a prison. The death of a version of yourself that, however painful, was at least familiar, predictable, controllable. There is a cruel difference between knowing what is right and having the courage to do it. Millions of people spend years, entire decades, knowing exactly what they need to change in their lives. They know they need to get out of that relationship that suffocates them. They know they need to leave that job that kills their soul. They know they need to stop living to please others. But between knowing and acting, there is a chasm that seems insurmountable. This chasm is filled with an invisible but dense substance, the fear of freedom. Because freedom is not just the absence of external prisons. It is, above all, total responsibility for one's own choices. And that responsibility is more terrifying than any prison. At least in prison, someone can blame the bars. In freedom, all that remains is to accept the consequences. The deepest fear is not that of failure. It is that of discovering that it was always possible to live differently, but that you lost years, perhaps decades, choosing security over life. This is the fear that paralyzes. The possibility of looking back and realizing that all that pain was avoidable, that all that conformity was a choice, that all that inauthenticity was a betrayal of oneself. But there is something even more frightening than this fear. The possibility of never discovering who we really are beneath all the masks, of dying without ever having lived authentically, of reaching the end of life carrying the silent weight of all the what-ifs that were never explored. The human psyche has a perverse mechanism that prefers familiar pain to unknown joy. It is easier to endure a miserable life we know than to risk a full life that may disappoint us. This mechanism evolved to protect us from physical dangers, but in modern life it has become a psychological prison that protects us from life itself. The leap cannot be gradual. It is not possible to be half authentic, half free, or live half the truth. Authenticity requires radicalism, not because it is dramatic, but because it is integral. Either one chooses to live according to one's inner truth, or one continues to play a role. There is no middle ground that works in the long run. And here lies the cruelest paradox of the process. It is only possible to develop courage by acting courageously. There is no way to train for freedom in safety. There is no way to rehearse authenticity within conformity. Courage is a muscle that only develops by being exercised in situations that really require courage. That is why the inner dragon is so cunning. It offers 1,000 ways to postpone the leap. First, I'll save up money. First, I'll prepare myself better. First, I'll talk to everyone. First, I'll make sure. But the first never ends. There is always one more preparation, one more guarantee, one more security to seek before finally acting. The dragon is especially cruel because it uses our own intelligence against us. The more intelligent someone is, the more elaborate the rationalizations for not acting become. Intelligence without courage becomes a tool for self-sabotage, creating increasingly sophisticated scenarios to explain why today is not the day, why this is not the way, why this is not the time. The truth that no one tells you is that those who wait to be ready never jump, because being ready would mean not being afraid, and not being afraid would mean that the jump is not significant enough. Fear is not the enemy of courage. It is the indicator that we are heading in the right direction. Jung observed that all great processes of transformation in human life necessarily involve a period of chaos, confusion, disorientation. The caterpillar does not gradually transform into a butterfly. It completely dissolves into an amorphous substance before reorganizing itself into a completely new form. The most dangerous moment in the whole process is not when we decide to jump. It is when we start to rationalize why we should not jump. When the inner dragon manages to convince us that mediocre life is not so bad, that perhaps it is better to accept things as they are, that perhaps that inner calling was just a phase, a fantasy, a romantic illusion. But there is a force in the human psyche that is more powerful than any fear, the need for integrity. And when that force finally overcomes all resistance, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change, something inevitable happens. There comes a time when all excuses are exhausted, when all rationalizations lose their power, when all the tomorrows reveal their true face, a lie told to postpone the inevitable. It is the moment when one must choose between continuing to be a victim of one's circumstances or taking radical responsibility for one's own existence. This responsibility is not a burden. It is a liberation. Because those who take full responsibility for their own lives also take full power to change them. There is no one else to blame. There are no more external factors to use as excuses. There are no more ifs or whens or maybes. There is only the raw, naked, inevitable choice to act or to accept mediocrity as destiny. Society teaches us to outsource our freedom, to wait for someone to give us permission to live, for someone to validate us, approve of us, instruct us on how to be happy. But no one will come. No guru, no therapist, no partner, no boss, no father or mother will come to solve the equation of your existence, because that equation is non-transferable. It is personal. It is yours. Jung realized that real psychological maturity begins when we stop expecting the world to adjust to our needs and start taking full responsibility for our experience. Not for the events that happen to us, but for how we respond to those events. Not for the circumstances we face, but for the meaning we choose to give to those circumstances. This means accepting that if you are unhappy in your relationship, the responsibility to leave or transform the dynamic is yours. If you are stuck in a job that kills your soul, the responsibility to seek alternatives is yours. If you live a life that does not resonate with who you really are, the responsibility for change is entirely yours. No exceptions, no mitigating factors, no excuses. This truth is liberating and terrifying at the same time. Liberating because it means you are not at the mercy of external forces. Terrifying because it means there's no one else to blame for the life you have built. Every choice you made, every compromise you accepted, every dream you abandoned was, in some way, your decision. But accepting this responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for the past. It means taking power over the future. It means stopping wasting energy trying to change others and starting to use that energy to transform yourself. It means understanding that your freedom does not depend on anyone but yourself. Radical responsibility also means accepting that your pain is not special, that your situation is not unique, that your fears are no different from the fears of anyone who has decided to live authentically. And that therefore your excuses are also not special, unique, or different. They are just excuses. Millions of people have managed to get out of toxic relationships. Millions of people have managed to leave jobs they hated. Millions of people have managed to rebuild their lives from scratch. And they weren't braver, more prepared, or more special than you. They simply stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started acting with what they had. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It's happening right now. While you ponder, hesitate, prepare, plan, life slips through your fingers like sand, and one day you look back and realize that you spent years preparing to live but forgot to live. There is a difference between being responsible and being guilty. Guilt looks to the past and paralyzes you. Responsibility looks to the future and takes action. Guilt asks, why did this happen to me? Responsibility asks, what am I going to do now that this has happened? When someone takes radical responsibility for their own life, something magical happens. The world ceases to be a hostile place full of obstacles and becomes a field of infinite possibilities. Because every problem becomes an opportunity to grow. Every challenge becomes a chance to discover inner resources you didn't know existed. The hardest and most liberating truth of all is that you have always had the power to change your life. Always. From the beginning. What was missing was not ability, it was not opportunity, it was not knowledge. What was missing was the courage to take full responsibility for your own existence. And that courage does not come from outside. It cannot be bought, borrowed, or taught. It emerges from the moment you finally tire of being a victim of your own life. When the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change. When you realize that you would rather fail trying to be yourself than succeed being someone else. The journey of radical responsibility is a lonely one. Not because you are alone, but because no one can walk it for you. Every step must be yours. Every decision must come from your core. Every change must emerge from your authentic will. But there is a profound beauty in this loneliness. It is the beauty of discovering that you are enough, that you carry within you all the resources you need to create the life you've always dreamed of, that you don't need external salvation because you are capable of saving yourself. And when you finally take on that responsibility, when you stop waiting and start acting, when you stop being a victim and become the creator of your own existence, you discover the most precious truth of all. Freedom has always been inside the prison. When was the moment in your life when you realized you were waiting for permission that would never come? Write it in the comments. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.